back on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. My next guest is, well, I think she's, if I recall correctly, she's described herself at times as an accidental activist, but she is very involved in the situation in West Virginia, and she's going to tell us more about it. Amy Jo Hutchison is involved with, you can find more about her work on rattlethewindows.com, but basically, well, I have my own idea of what I think of Amy Jo as, but not to make you nervous, Amy Jo, but she's doing fantastic work, and I wanted to bring her on the show so she could tell you all about it. So, first of all, Amy Jo Hutchison, welcome to the Zero Hour.
Thank you, Richard. It's so nice to be here. I'm excited for the conversation.
Well, we're thrilled to have you because, you know, what I was really hinting at there in the introduction is it's people like you in the end that are going to make a difference. I mean, we all have our roles to play, but what you're doing is so important. And was I right that you've called yourself an accidental activist?
Yes. That's
okay, so
a fair term, I think.
Well, it's a good term. You know, it's... and I know you said, you know, you were an activist before you knew there was such a thing or that there was a word for it, and which is the best way to be it. I could tell you stories, but let's start with this. First of all, what part of West Virginia do you live in?
I live in the northern panhandle, so I'm pretty close to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and not far from northern Maryland, I imagine, maybe Frederick or around there somewhere, right?
Yeah, it takes me about 4.5 hours to get to DC from here.
Yeah, okay. So I've got a sense. So it's pretty rural, right? It's as a lot of West Virginia is, except for the cities. I would guess that where you live is a pretty rural part of the state, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things about West Virginia is you could be down, quote unquote, downtown in the county seat and literally just go a minute up the road, and it's a completely different world.
Yeah. And how did you get living out there? Have you always lived there or thereabouts?
I've always been in the northern panhandle. Yes, I've never lived anywhere else.
So how did you take the road from whatever life you were leading before to becoming an activist? If you don't mind taking a few minutes and just telling us your story.
Oh, no, not at all. So I was an early Head Start teacher, and my daughters were in elementary school, and an organization came to speak to us at staff training, and she started to talk about this new organization that has started in West Virginia, and she was using words like grassroots and organizing, and I had never heard anyone talk about this stuff before. My daughters, we lived in a very low-income, high-need neighborhood at the time, and so we went. My kids were going to a Title I school, and I had just decided that I was going to take on the leadership position for the parent-teacher organization. And so I went to talk to her, and we had a conversation, you know, just about people are learning about policy. They're going to try to push policies through that'll benefit them. And their whole purpose was to eliminate childhood poverty. And this after our conversation, I just kind of started hanging out in the background, you know, attending conference calls. These were pre-Zoom days, Richard. So really, you know, you remember the old conference calls. And just learning what this whole thing was about. And then I guess the more I learned, the more I wanted to be involved. My first real issue was before I'd met the organizer, but they wanted to tear a swimming pool down in my daughter's school. And we were the only elementary school in the state, we still are, I believe, that had a swimming pool. And in our neighborhood in the summer, the only thing for the kids to do is to go to the city pool. You know, it was cost 50 cents a day. And
Sure.
I'm like, well, you can't tear the swimming pool down. That's all these kids have in the summer. They need to learn how to swim. And so I spent one Saturday Googling every elected official. I'd never done anything like this. So I think, I contacted our county commissioners, I think, and the mayor, and just anyone I could think of. And one thing led to another. And I was kind of thrown in the middle of this power struggle, so to speak. But it ended up with the school being awarded $4.6 million for renovations. And I think I did that by myself, and so imagine if I would have had 100 people with me, what a
Right.
big difference that would have made. And so that was pretty much the beginning. I was organizing before I even knew organizing was a thing.
And then you met this person, and did you get recruited into an organization or something like that?
Yeah, as they call it, the grassroots movement. Again, what was grassroots, but I did volunteer for them, and every time a new organizer would be hired, because I was so embedded in my community,
Uh-huh.
my name would come up, and so they would contact me, and eventually, one man was leaving his position, and he said, "I think you ought to apply." And it was something that I never thought was possible. It seemed like a job that was out of my reach, to be honest with you, because of my lived
Uh-huh.
experience. And but I took a chance, and here I am, almost 8 years later, I think.
So what are you doing now? Tell us a little bit about your work right now.
Yeah, so right, I've kind of left the industrial complex, the nonprofit industrial complex, and
Uh-huh.
I'm an independent contractor now. And so right now I'm working with Moms Rising. That's my big one. And Think Kids West Virginia. We're doing some health focus groups on healthcare.
And you have your own website, right? Rattle the Windows is your website. And I went there before we talked, and you had me at your, what it says right across the top, right at the top. The system isn't broken; it's working as designed. That to me, I think already you won me over with that because to me I think people don't understand that. I think a lot of people think, well, this program isn't, it was well intentioned, but at this, but at that. That's how I take it to mean, right? That actually the outcome of more economic inequality and the few getting more and more and the many getting less and less is kind of that's not an accident. I mean, that's what I take it to mean. But what did you mean when you put it in there?
No, I mean that's exactly what I meant, and there are so many pieces to this. One thing that I'll mention, just because it's been coming up a lot in the past couple of days with me, but around here, everyone will say, "Well, we have good paying jobs. That's $11.50, $10 an hour." Sometimes I know women
Right.
out here with bachelor's degrees working for $15,000 a year. And what that is just enough money to keep you from receiving any sort of safety net assistance. And so what happens is it just becomes this cycle where people really can't work and make enough to survive. So they're constantly forced to choose between providing for their families and relying on safety net assistance, or out here barely making it. Paycheck to paycheck doesn't even describe it in too many instances, right? Like a friend of mine always says, "I have too much month at the end of my money."
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And then what a
yeah,
lot of people do, they maybe, I don't know if you guys have payday lenders out there or whatever,
yeah.
but then they start to come in, they borrow $100, a couple of $100 from them, and then they can't pay that. And then all of a sudden it's 400, 500, 600,000 bucks. And it's a cycle, right? It's a trap that people just can't get out of.
It absolutely is. I went to a training years ago on poverty, and the presenter said to check the financial health of your neighborhood to see how many pawn shops and payday loan places there are, and
Right.
dollar stores. Yeah.
Right, absolutely, and like they say, it's expensive to be poor too, because if you can't, if you can't buy, if you smoke, if you can't buy a carton of cigarettes or even a pack of cigarettes, then you're buying them one at a time. The less you can buy in bulk, the more you spend. It goes on and on that way. Not to mention how hard it is to get. I don't know what the healthcare situation is where you are, but if there's with the rural hospitals closing down and hard to get good medical care, so you got to add on to your medical care the cost of getting there, and it goes up. But I'm telling you what you know better than me, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it truly is. It is designed to set up this way, though, Richard. I think there's always been a stigma against quote unquote welfare, recipients and programs, and like the cliff effect. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's if you are relying on safety net programs and then you receive more hours or a small pay raise, it's just enough to throw you over the cliff. And, I know a lot of people who have really been forced to leave the workforce because immediately they lose their SNAP benefits and they lose their housing assistance and, their health insurance. And so these costs are just immediate and they're astronomical. And there's just no grace period here to be able to get your head above water a little bit before the programs start cutting you off, and that's a huge problem. I wish that people understood how hard it was. Like, if you, I don't, when I was on food stamp SNAP, when I was a SNAP recipient, I received $500 and some a month. I'm the only parent of two kids. And as soon as that disappears, that may not seem like a big hit to people, but trying to come up with an extra $500 or $600 a month, that's absolutely a big hit.
Sure it is. And, the other thing that I think a lot of people don't understand is that if you're getting assistance that totals, $1,000 a month, just pick a number, and you're working for $1,500 a month, right? Then really, you're working for $500 and you got to find childcare. If you're a single parent, you got to, get transportation. You got to do all these things for what amounts to like pennies on the dollar per hour, right? I mean, is that your experience?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah. And when we were having the student loan forgiveness talk, I said, here we are in a country, where we know if you have $125,000, we should be able to forgive your student debt. But we don't pay attention to the fact that the federal poverty guidelines for a family of 7 is like, I don't know, is it under 30? You'll have to check me, but it's like $39,000 or something for a family of 7. It's like around 50 for a family of 9. So but I'm like, if you have $125,000 or less, you can't afford to pay your student loans. Let's just not think about where the federal poverty guidelines have people.
Well, that brings up something that I've really been thinking about a lot, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, Amy Jo Hutchison, which is, I feel like nobody wants to talk about poor people in the political world or, the other world. I mean, maybe once in a while there'll be a sentimental movie about, a mom living in a trailer and, every 5 years there'll be one like that. And they're pretty good, but I feel as if in the political world, Democrats are told, well, maybe they care, but they're told, well, it's not a good issue. It makes our voters uncomfortable. So we don't hear much about it on the news. We don't hear much about it from politicians. And here in D.C., the consultants will all tell you, well, poor people don't vote. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me like poor people in America, I mean, I don't know what the number is now. Last I looked, it was 41 million. And, probably went down because of some of the pandemic stuff, and now it's going up again. But it seems to me like that's a hell of a lot of people not to be talking about. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that, on how maybe to get people to talk about poor and low-income people more.
Yeah, Richard, that's interesting. I actually I do a little talk about how the best stories are written in the margins. Why it's so important for us to not only create space for people with lived experience, but we have to, like, how do we onboard them into this work, right? Like, how do we get them out of the margins from standing around the outside walls of the room and actually give them a seat at the table in the center? And I mean, first of all, we are so ignorant in this country as to what poverty really looks like. When I started my job as an organizer, the most commonly asked question was, where do you find poor people?
Where do you find poor people?
And I was just like, because my job was to talk to poor people. Right? And so people would ask me this all the time. And it was, usually, and I can't believe you have this many people here, or I can't believe you've collected this many stories. Where do you find poor people? And it became such such a thorn in my side that I started saying, well, I think we hang out at the laundromats on Mondays. I mean, like, what does that even mean? And
Right, right.
but we just don't understand that there are so many levels of poverty, first of all, and not everyone is living in abject poverty. And then we have this gray area of the working poor. And like,
Mhm.
well, I guess we could start there. Why is there such a phrase as the working poor in the first place? That doesn't make any sense to me. Um, but
Right.
so we just have different levels, and the truth is, we probably all know. I mean, at least here where I live, we probably all know someone who is struggling, but we're just embarrassed about it. There's a lot of shame and guilt, and we just don't have those conversations. We don't open ourselves up. We don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable about that, right? About our money situation or our financial health. And I think that until we really are honest, one of the statistics that really struck me the hardest about the child tax credit and how successful that was and how helpful it was the fact that plasma donations decreased. And so like, and I mean,
Yeah.
it's, when I told that to
Right.
my friend, I was like, if you know, you know. But a lot of people don't. They don't know the lengths that hardworking Americans. I mean, let's real talk, Richard. The low wage jobs aren't the sexy jobs in America. They're usually physically
Right.
demanding, and they're direct care, direct person to person contact in a lot of them, whether that's at a restaurant or as a caregiver, as a child care worker. Um, but a lot of people, like, they just don't understand the way this system works and the way this system is designed and how this plays out for folks. And I don't think any of us really realize how close we are to being there ourselves.
Well, there's a statistic, I'm sure you know it, that says, I'm trying to remember the exact number, but it says something like 50% of Americans will experience at least 1 year of poverty in their lives. I have. I mean, I was very young, and I did, and but at least I'm still okay. I'll be honest with you, Amy Jo. My mind is still reeling over this. Where do you find your poor people? Because to me, that speaks to a big problem with even a lot of very well-intentioned people who go into social work, organizing, other caring things. They do it because they want to help, and that's all. That's admirable. That's fine. They could get better paying jobs, I'm sure, and other lines of work and all that. But the fact is, because they don't come from that world, that culture, what I take that to mean is it's alien to them. I mean that, and anywhere in this country, you can take a short drive and find more poor people than you could get their stories from in a lifetime, it seems to me. So it seems to me that what that says is that we need activists and organizers and, journalists and everything else who come from that community, who know that community, who can speak with and from this community with comfort. And we don't have that yet, do we?
No, absolutely not. And, one of the things that usually happens whenever I do a presentation, I'm going to say for non-poor folks, right? Or people
Right.
that you wouldn't assume are poor, uh, there's always at least someone that comes up to me afterwards and shares their personal story. And it usually starts with, no one knows this, but,
Yeah.
so it's almost like once you escape poverty, it's so traumatic. I don't know, really, but I think it's my own experience is it's so traumatic that sometimes you don't want to look back on those moments, and you do want to make sure that you want to get out of there, right? And
Yeah.
I think that has a lot to do with it, and the fact that, like, I mean, look at what we say about poor people. It's always a fault of their own. One thing that I usually say a lot is we treat poverty like it's a character defect in this country. you know
Definitely. Yeah.
yeah, when it's really not. But if you're coming from that experience and you know the way that you're treated, you know the things that are said about your demographic, then it's really hard to stand up and say, hey, you know what, that was me too. Which in my opinion, we need just the opposite to happen. If we had strong leaders step forward and say, you know what, I escaped poverty and this is how I did it, I think that would be an interesting conversation.
It
And I
sure.
also, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I mean, I also think I used to think that the biggest important role for myself as an organizer, because I do organize with poor marginalized folks, but I used to think that my biggest role was to make sure that I had all those stories that I could collect, and they were the ones missing days off work, and then finally I was like, you know what, we need some non-poor middle class allies in this work who can use their privilege and their connections to get us in the room with people that we normally would never be able to have access to, right? I mean, even sometimes on the local government level, but we also need people who have paid time off or who have vacation days, who have childcare. Like, we need those allies in this work so it can help free up some of the resources that we have or don't have as impacted folks to be able to get this work done.
Absolutely. And, there's another aspect of this, which is, Amy Jo, which is the humiliation. And, I don't know where you're at with this, but I know that during the period of time that I think I'm a peaceful guy, right? But during the time that I had no money, I mean, really, eating canned, beans or whatever, living in one room with just a hot plate. And I was a writer, and I got an assignment that would have paid me like $50 or something, and my typewriter broke. This was back in the days of typewriters. And I'm telling this story for a reason. So I take it there was a typewriter repair store down the street. I take it to the typewriter store. I said, I've only got $5. Can you fix my typewriter for $5? And the man just laughed in my face. And I swear to you, if it's a good thing I didn't have a gun at the time, because I would have robbed that guy and taken his best typewriter. And I'm not trying to stigmatize poor people with this. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that if you've never experienced the humiliation, you don't know how cutting it can be. And I don't know, when you live in a community of poor people, maybe it's not that bad because everybody else is in the same boat. But I don't know in your mind if or how this sort of disrespect, and if you know what I'm talking about, how that fits in.
I know exactly what you're talking about. There was a time my kid she had the flu, a little virus, and she wasn't eating and she wasn't drinking. So I went to the grocery store to buy some popsicles. She had a fever. I needed to keep her hydrated. I knew they would eat popsicles. And when I'm standing in the checkout line, of course, I swipe my EBT card, and somebody behind me makes a comment about how we shouldn't be allowed to buy junk on food stamps, and am I eating steak too, and blah blah blah. Never taken for a second to consider that there may be another reason why I'm buying those popsicles. And so I flipped her the finger and I cried all the way home.
Yeah, I'm sorry you had that. Yeah, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it happens all the time, where we just budget your money. That's the one that slays me, that people are like, just budget your money. And I'm like, what money? Like, how, we're budgeting. How do you think we're keeping the lights and the gas on? I mean, it's so much misconception about poverty, but I also think that it's because oppressed people, it takes a lot for them to be able to take the risk enough to speak up and to start knocking walls down. Right. I mean, that's the other thing, it's real hard for me to find people at times to go and speak to, whether that's a government official or to speak at a public forum or whatever, because we just, whenever you work in low wage jobs, you have low wage benefits. And so it's really hard for me to ask someone to make that sort of sacrifice and risk, but you can bet that if we do it, it's because it's something that's breaking our heart, and we just can't sit here and tolerate it 1 minute longer without saying something.
Yeah, absolutely. And believe me, I feel for you. I am, and it's important that people learn. They say, we heal from our traumas by taking action, right? And poverty can be traumatic and wounding, deeply wounding in a million different ways. And if we take actions, that's not just good because we're doing something good for ourselves and other people. It's healing, right? I mean, maybe it's not overnight, it's not instantaneous, but you start to walk on the road of, I'm taking a little control back, and I'm just wondering how your neighbors and the people around you react when you bring this kind of work and this kind of message to them.
Most of the people that I do life with, they understand because it's their lived experience as well, so there's that. But I mean, for the most part, people they'll listen to me. I don't know if it changes anything. I don't know if like their whole perspective is going to be changed. But one thing that I do know is I try to leave everyone with something to think about. So like out of nowhere it'll come and they'll remember that being said to them, if that makes sense. Because I really just think it's about having honest conversations, and it's a real awkward space for me at times because I'm kind of like moving back between, I don't know, socioeconomic realms, to be honest with you, because I work for contracts, so some days I'm out here killing it and other days I'm like, oh man, we have to tighten the belt. And I mean, so it's kind of weird for me because I am getting to see a lot of different perspectives and just touch a lot of different people from, across the line, the socioeconomic line. It's two totally different spaces, Richard. I'll just say that.
Yeah, no, I totally get you. Believe me, I do. So what are you working on now?
Right now, childcare is a big one, and paid leave.
Both at the state level for West Virginia or nationally, or?
We just kind of respond where the need is. I always try to focus on the state, always. But then if there's federal work to be had, then we hop up that level too.
I just read something recently that said that there's like a 30,000 worker shortage nationally in childcare or something like that. And I know childcare workers are so underpaid. There's a shortage of nursing home workers. Yeah. Nursing home workers are underpaid. We haven't even talked about, the problems of the elderly. If you're poor and you're moving into, your old age, what's going to happen to you? And when we had to put my mother in a home, and some of the places I looked at were just like frightening, they're just appalling. And, so, you got your work cut out for you. That's for sure.
Good job security.
I guess so. Yeah. But, so how optimistic are you versus pessimistic versus like neither?
Oh, well,
I know it's a big question. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a Scorpio, so I look at things a little differently. Excuse me, Richard, I guess that's one of the questions that's asking me a lot by people I work with is, how do you feel? Do you feel this was a success? And to me, the success comes from watching someone who has never spoken up before, who has never taken a stand for themselves or their families, doing that. Right. I mean, that might be showing up at an event to just provide support. That may be testifying, whatever that looks like. So I am always optimistic because I think the more people that we empower, turning their pain into power, that's how we talk about it with the people I work with. But if we can just keep on turning our pain into power, I think every time we do that, it does make a difference. And even if that's just in one person's mind that's sitting in the room listening, that's one person that we didn't have on our side yesterday, and I have two girls, one's in college now. The other one is in high school, but I tell them, they've been raised with all this stuff around them. They're quite the social justice people. But, I tell them all the time, I said, my generation, I'm almost 51 years old. I'll be 51 in a couple of weeks. Like, we're getting tired, and so we're just laying the groundwork. You are going to be the ones that have to push this over the finish line for your own kids, so, I mean, I don't know if I'll ever live to see what I think would be a perfect situation, but I think my daughter's generation is going to be one step closer than mine, and I think my grandkids' generation is going to be even closer than that. So I am hopeful and optimistic, but I also know that this is a marathon and not a sprint.
Yeah, and I think one great thing about our kids' generation is that they don't have the shame associated with, this shame is so disabling, And if we can get people past the shame, understanding that it's a system problem, it's not a personal failure, it's not any one of those things, I think we'll be doing the world a hell of a lot of good right there, and let them take it from there. But I do want to ask you, your website, rattlethewindows.com, where do you get that phrase, rattle the windows?
When I did the congressional testimony that went a little viral there back in 2020, as I was looking at the comments across social media, people started pulling that line out. It was a line from our video, right after "Shame on you, shame on me," for not rattling the windows. And I was like, "Oh, look at that!" And so, but I mean, it was almost like a battle cry, I guess, to folks. They really latched onto that and they started hashtagging it. And I'm like, "Let's do it. Let's build this grassroots movement and let's call it Rattle the Windows."
It's a line from a Bob Dylan song too. He's let me see it. Come senators, congressmen, please heed the call. Get out of the doorway. Don't block up the hall. Oh, there's something about the don't block up the hall. For he who gets hurt will be he who has stalled. There's a battle outside and it's raging. Will soon rattle your windows and break down your walls. For the times they are a-changing. Yeah.
I did not know that. That's awesome. I'm going to
Doesn't it fit right in? Yeah. Yeah. But listen, Amy Jo Hutchison, you're doing fantastic work. And I don't know if there's a way people can help you, but there's, or certainly they can learn more about you, but, help us with that. Where can people go? What can they do, if anything?
Yeah, I'm Rattle the Windows on Facebook. I don't ask for financial donations, but here's what I will say. If they want to contribute financially, I can connect you with some organizations, in my state and other states that do great, fantastic work. I may suggest Moms Rising because I am working with Moms Rising right now, and just maybe earmark that West Virginia or something like that so they know where it's coming from. But you can follow me on social media at Rattle the Windows, rattlethewindows.com. One day I'm going to have enough time and be able to slow down enough to keep that website updated. But I am very organic and grassroots, Richard. So it's slow moving, but it's coming.
I hear you. Believe me, it's a story of my life. But again, Amy Jo Hutchison, West Virginia organizer and accidental, but now deliberate activist, I would say. I love what you're doing, so thank you for that, and great talking with you, so thank you for coming on the program.
Oh, this was wonderful. Thank you. We need to do this more, right, on bigger spaces all the time, so I appreciate this. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for being an ally, Richard.
You got it. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.